Hello, everyone. This is Sarah. Thank you for tuning into Vegan Theology today. Before we start the episode, I want to make sure you know about the Vegan's Almanac. The Vegan's Almanac is a daily 5 to 6 minute podcast that is designed to give you some vegan inspiration and encouragement. You'll learn about amazing animals and the people who are defending and protecting them. We celebrate vegan authors, actors, athletes, musicians, politicians, philosophers, scientists, filmmakers, and theologians. We discuss the life-giving and planet-saving benefits of eating plants. And we always end with a moment of meditation, poetry, or prayer. It's always interesting, and it's always uplifting. Check out the Vegan's Almanac wherever you get your podcasts. It's a new day. And now, here is today's Vegan Theology episode.
Hey everybody, this is Vegan Theology, episode 46 with Kevin and Sarah Hale.
Good morning, Kevin.
Morning, how's it going?
Good. Nice to see you.
Yeah, a little early this morning.
We are here very early this morning.
Yeah.
Fitting it in the morning.
Yeah. So, we are very excited. This year we registered for the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics, the summer school. That's basically the flagship of Dr. Andrew Lindsay, his daughter, Dr. Claire Lindsay. And their summer school this year, the topic is the ethics of captivity. So, we're very excited. Get
Very
to meet
excited.
Andrew Lindsay and Claire Lindsay. That's like going to be the highlight, not only of the year, but I don't know, maybe the decade. I mean, this is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
I think for both of us.
It's a very big deal.
I think there may be limited seats, but hey,
Yeah.
make your way to Oxford this summer, August 4th through the 7th. Maybe we'll see you.
Yeah. I think it's going to be quite an experience.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be awesome.
For us. Very
Yeah.
exciting. And today we are at the chapter on Chinese traditions in Lisa Kemmerer's book, Animals and World Religions.
Yeah.
So we're making our way through this. I think we're about halfway
Yeah.
through them. We've covered what indigenous traditions had to say about our relationships with animals, as well as Hindu traditions
Yeah,
and
Buddhist.
Buddhist traditions. This chapter focuses on Confucianism and Daoism.
Yeah. Even though the Chinese traditions also incorporate Buddhism, but I feel
Exactly.
like she says because she spent a whole chapter on Buddhism, she's really just going to focus on Confucianism and Taoism in this chapter.
Yeah. And then we have next time Judaism, and then Christianity, and then Islam.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting, right? We keep talking about that.
Yeah.
After studying these. I think kind of what you were saying earlier this week, I think we're just still trying to absorb, especially this chapter. Maybe this chapter was a little more challenging for our understanding. The Chinese culture and tradition, they're very inclusive, very different than maybe the Christian, Jewish, and maybe Muslim mindset.
Right. Yeah,
But-
we got to talk about that.
Yeah, they don't have a problem accepting all kinds of
Yeah.
the Taoist, Confucian, and the Buddhist traditions all mixed together. I mean, even our experiences in Africa, the mixing of ancestral worship and tribal religions with Christianity, that was a big no-no for many Christians. We use the word syncretism to describe that relationship of mixing of religions, and we want this pure Christianity, even though in reality that's not ever true, because 21st century Christianity is very different than first century Christianity. And that's, say, in the United States versus in Palestine. So, you know what I mean? You're never going to have a pure Christianity. It's just never going to happen. But if it seems more, quote unquote, egregious, then many, especially conservative Christians, would have a problem with that. But it's just interesting that the Chinese traditions are more open-minded about their mixing of faiths. Maybe it's the underlying values that are similar. To quote Kemmerer in this chapter, outside of the Judeo-Christian Islamic faiths, notions of the one right way, the only truth, are generally viewed as peculiar, narrow, and short-sighted. People in China, for example, tend to believe that adhering to one religion does not preclude adherence to another or several others. Chinese people who are inclined towards spirituality are likely to view all of the world's collective spiritual wisdom as worthy of consideration. Chinese religious traditions are therefore not exclusive. Chinese people have traditionally been Taoist, Confucian, and Buddhist.
All at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. She starts the chapter out hitting us with that. So right out of the gate, it feels, okay, this is very different than what we're used to.
Right.
I mean, exactly what she said. We are raised with this. There is one way to God. We have found it. We were given it. Everybody else is wrong and must be rejected.
Yeah.
And that's not the Chinese way of thinking at all. The spiritual Chinese person has no problem saying, oh, there's truth here. Oh, there's truth there.
Right.
And I adopt this as well.
Yeah. No, it's funny because we would frown upon something like that, I think, in the Western Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're not monotheist. I'm sure that helps to be a little bit more like, oh, especially as we'll see, these faiths build upon each other and speak to each other and have so many similarities with each other and influence each other. It's not like they're totally contradictory.
Right.
And like you said, our idolatry in the United States of consumerism and capitalism and industrialism definitely has overtaken our Christianity.
Right.
Our faith isn't pure either.
Right.
We mix our culture in very much.
We mix a lot of our culture in.
She goes on, indeed, China is home to a handful of great philosophies and religious traditions that were traditionally practiced simultaneously. She also mentions yin-yang cosmology, which is separate and yet mixed into every Chinese tradition. And as Kevin already said, she's going to focus on Confucianism and Daoism, saying that Buddhism is very much a part of the Chinese spiritual landscape, but we've already covered Buddhism pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
For example, she says, Taoism traditions accepted the philosophy of karma from Buddhism, which transformed the Chinese understanding of death, the afterlife, and ancestors. Buddhism and Taoism, in turn, helped to shape Neo-Confucianism. They're all kind of influencing each other. And Kevin, you mentioned this chapter was maybe a little bit more challenging for our way of thinking. I think part of what made this chapter a little challenging is the fact that these faiths are so similar. It is a little bit difficult to find distinction in terms of what they have to say about our relationship with animals. They read very similarly, so it's difficult to really find distinction.
Right.
I found that this next section of this chapter where she talks about sacred nature, sacred animals, it read very much like the Buddhist chapter.
Right.
And how much they love nature. She says that Confucianism mostly focuses on proper relationships, especially within the family and within your community. But it also has a lot to say about relationships with animals. And Taoism focuses more on our relationship with nature.
Yeah.
They have a slightly distinctive focus in that way, but they both have something to say about animals. And they would definitely both have something to say about nature.
I feel like in this chapter, though, there was just a little more emphasis on nature. It was almost like the person was trying to get back into nature away from people to restore their souls. And so, I don't know, I was a little taken with it.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting.
She quotes several beautiful poems written by Chinese spiritualists having to do with their love of nature, which were really evocative and beautiful.
Evocative is a great word.
I'll read a couple of my favorites, and I think you had one that you were taken with. You ask me why I dwell amidst these jade green hills. I smile. No words can tell the stillness in my heart. The peach bloom on the water, how enchantingly it drifts. I live in another realm here, beyond the world of men.
Yeah. There's one poem here. I just really like the way it ends, the last three lines. To him, all sounds are silence, and there is nothing else at all, just all-pervading coolness. And those three lines, especially the last one, really made me think of Genesis 1, when it talks about the earth being formless and void. And I know we've described that. I think we were influenced by John Walton. I actually went back and read his commentary a little bit on this. The Hebrew words tohu bohu, formless and empty, or formless and void. We describe the formlessness, darkness, all of those things as chaos or disorder. And the ancient Near Eastern mind is trying to put order on disorder. And yet at the same time, there was a sense that those words did mean a world that was not necessarily evil or malicious, but just unordered. There's a line later in this chapter talking about getting back to a place where there's no will. And it made me think of the Buddhist idea of nirvana. Some describe it as a state of perfect nothingness, that we're trying to get back to this state of, I'm not a Buddhist, I don't want to misrepresent it, but this place of no desire, this place of nothing, right? And it made me think of early Genesis. And I just was like, it's interesting that our tradition has a purpose, a will, and intelligence that's trying to go somewhere. And we talk about being stewards and organizing our world. And this mind is thinking about getting back to a place of almost fundamental essence before things are created. I don't want to misrepresent it. I'm really trying to understand it. But to me, there's some connection there.
Along the same lines, what I was picking up in this chapter is their value, both in Confucianism and in Daoism, of not interfering, of not imposing our will on the nature, on the world.
Yeah.
And similarly, what came up for me is, that's beautiful. And we could definitely use more of that in our Western thinking,
Right.
where we think we can do whatever we want.
Right.
But in terms of our mandate to be stewards, I do question the idea of complete passivity and not imposing any will on nature,
Right.
not intervening in any way.
Right.
Balancing these values
Right.
is an interesting, you could see a distinction between.
Yeah, and I feel like this is one of the first big distinctions, because I think we've been tracking with the values and going, oh, we got that. This is great. It is part of our mandate and just who we are. It's not a negative thing either. We are meant to be co-creators. And when you create something, you are putting intelligence and will into something and creating something wonderful, hopefully. And I think that's what we're meant to do. And a great commentary is John Walton's Genesis commentary. It's an intermediate commentary. It's not a technical commentary. It's not the easiest. But he really goes into this. As creators, part of our job is to organize. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Just some interesting thoughts.
Another poem from these traditions. All my life I have respected true reclusion. For days on end, sought spiritual mysteries. There are many pure notes in pines and streams. These moss-grown walls are wrapped in a feeling of antiquity. How I would like to retire to this very mountain, casting off both self and world alike. There's several here that I like that reveal their value of being in nature rather than pursuing worldly wealth, things like that.
Right. Well, that's interesting. One of the poems coming up is described as encourages humanity to exchange their material wealth for the spiritual delights of nature. If you think about it, say this was written hundreds of years ago. One of these was written in 700 CE. You just think about what the human condition was like back then. It sounds like it was fairly similar in essence to what ours is today.
Here's the last one I'm going to read. I hear amidst the silence the plash of a mountain rill. Birds sing and petals fall. Of men there is no trace. The window of my hut is curtained with white cloud. So the three that I read explicitly state getting away from other people. Beyond the world of men is one line. One line is reclusion, casting off both self and world. And the third one, there's a line, of men there is not a trace.
Right. That's what I was alluding to.
Yeah. On the one hand, I completely resonate. I know in my own spiritual walk, the getting alone with myself, the getting alone with God, the getting alone in nature has been the most important thing to me.
Yeah.
In terms of my connection to my essence, who I was created to be, and connection with God. I do agree that for me, and probably for each individual, that getting alone is so important. And we have biblical precedents for this as well. I love how the Gospels talk over and over and over again about how Jesus got away. Jesus left them and went to be alone.
Yeah.
So this is a Christian thing too. The averse reaction that I have to some of this is, where's the focus on human relationships? I think that's probably in there too. We just said Confucianism is all about human relationships, proper human relationships.
Family values, right?
Sometimes I'm like, well, anyone can be spiritual when you don't have to deal with a spouse and children and parents, coworkers.
You're right. You're right.
I could be very spiritual and centered when I'm all by myself all day.
That's right. Before I was married and had kids, I was very spiritual in the military. And then,
when you're doing life with people, even in these monasteries, I know they have to live in community. They have to deal with the annoyance of being with other people. So I know that there is a relational component.
But some monasteries, they don't really talk much, right? They're among each other, but there's almost like a vow of silence.
Still, it's like so-and-so doesn't clean up after himself, or so-and-so always takes the good meditating area that I want, or so-and-so snores too loud and it disturbs my sleep.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure that they have to keep their spirituality in the midst of human relationships.
What is funny, right? How often the Christian tradition focuses on community and church. That just gets so emphasized to the detriment maybe of getting alone. Mm-hmm. Restoring your soul, I think you and I are similar in that way. We restore ourselves alone.
Within this sacred nature, sacred animal section, she brings up a couple other things that were very interesting to me. The Chinese understanding of cause and effect did not stop with humanity. Imbalance in human communities, particularly human corruption and domination, was believed to cause imbalance in nature. For example, human imbalance such as injustice or greed would likely lead to natural disasters such as famine or a severe earthquake. Consequently, an unobtrusive lifestyle was held as the ideal lifestyle. That just reminded me of the indigenous mindset. What we do to our natural world could have huge consequences on our survival. We need to walk lightly so that nature continues to cooperate with us and so that we can continue to survive with nature.
Right. I know Native Americans have this 7-generation rule. It's kind of a rule of thumb, I guess, that whatever you do, think about 7 generations down the road, how it might affect them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This way of thinking discourages striving and competition, growth and development. In the Taoist worldview, spiritual advancement is preferable to material advancement, and philosophical growth is preferred to technological growth. Very contrary to the ways of the world.
Right.
Now we're going to split into Confucian philosophy and morality, and then we'll go into Taoist philosophy and morality. And again, a lot of overlap, a lot of similarities with some distinctions here and there. With both the Confucian philosophy and morality and then the Taoist, she gives us some really interesting vocabulary which represent core values within those traditions. With Confucian philosophy and morality, we're going to talk about Tian, Ren, Junzi, and then the great ultimate, the great unity and benevolence. This is where she's proving her very point in writing this book, which is when you boil down all of the world's great religions in terms of what they say about our relationship with animals, they all basically say the exact same thing, which is compassion, loving kindness, benevolence, unity of being, oneness, kinship. So she's proving that point. This sounds a lot like what we've read in other chapters. Tian is the ultimate religious and moral authority in Confucian traditions. Confucian traditions do not teach of an anthropocentric ruler in charge of the universe. Instead, all of their deities must comply with Tian Li, which is the principle of heaven, from which the myriad creatures receive their life. Tianli is also the moral order of the Chinese universe. This moral order permeates all living things, animals, as well as humans, plants, etc. The same moral order pervades all living beings and the natural universe. It's almost like a force, kind of what we talked about with Buddhism.
Right.
It's not necessarily a personal deity or overarching supreme being, but there's this force within everything.
Yeah.
So Tian may be very similar to the Taoist principle of the Tao. I was just thinking. All right. The second one she brings up is Ren. Ren is very interesting. The moral nature of the universe is reflected in humanity, which is by nature virtuous. Consequently, both, quote, humanity and, quote, virtue are indicated by a single Chinese term, Ren. In the Confucian tradition, the importance of Ren cannot be overstated. Ren must come before any other consideration. It is a supreme value, more precious than one's own life, and therefore an idea worth dying for. Love is a defining characteristic of Ren. Love is the tender aspect of human feelings, altruistic concern for others. Those who are Ren are humane and benevolent. Tenderness and altruism, kindness and benevolence are central to humanity and to Confucian morality. Gentle compassion is the ultimate Confucian virtue. I thought that was so interesting that the same word is used for virtue and humanity, which speaks to me of their view of humanity is that we are essentially good.
Right.
We are essentially virtuous.
Right. I thought the same, and I think we both came to this conclusion. Their whole thinking is different than our thinking, that essentially humans are good, and when humans are tied in with their essential being or their essential selves, they're going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of meditating and getting in nature is to get you back to a place where you're resonating with your essential self so that you can be good, I think is the essence of it. Whereas very different from our tradition, right, where we are morally corrupt. And we
hopelessly lost.
Yeah. And
prone to sin.
And we need help. It's a very different way of looking at the world.
Junzi is the next term. Junzi is basically when a human being, just like you were talking about, Kevin, has returned to their moral or noble state. A person who lives up to human moral responsibilities and therefore is sensitive to the world. Good people do not delight in suffering or premature unnecessary death. So the Junzi, a noble person, cares about the rest of the world.
Yeah.
The primary Confucian text, Analects, focuses on conversations between the master Confucius and his disciples. In these dialogues, Confucius teaches his pupils not to take unfair advantage of other creatures. He tells his pupils that the human mind, which is innately good, cannot bear to see the suffering of others. The Confucian mind of compassion feels all suffering and every loss of life as its own moral responsibility.
See, that seems very Buddhist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would hope in its best sense, it seems very Christian as well.
Yeah.
Even though maybe not as emphasized.
Right.
The great ultimate is the next value.
Yeah, in the sense of the great ultimate, it looks like it might be an innovation from Neo-Confucianism. And it says it's a sense of the original source or creative power. This fundamental conception of the origins of the universe has important implications for white-flagged dolphins, blue slate turkey, golden-haired monkeys, and the South China tiger. In the Neo-Confucian vision, now simply the Confucian vision, all things stem from the great ultimate, and therefore no being is above or separate from any other. So that's very interesting. And then also there's a thing here that says all beings receive mind from this single source. And of course, this reminds me of the logos in the Christian tradition. It's also a Greek idea. Many of the Stoics spoke of logos. It's like the reason that governs the universe. And I know we identify that with Christ. He is the creator of the universe, and he is a person and not a force. But the concepts of reason and intelligence that help to create the world are all part of this concept of logos.
The great ultimate goes right into the next thing, which is great unity. Neo-Confucian scholars quickly surmise that if all things stem from the great ultimate, then all things are interconnected, forming one great unity. Indeed, core Confucian teachings affirm the fundamental similarity of all living things. And there's a metaphor here, just like all clay pots are made out of clay, basically all creatures are the same stuff with the same desires, the same needs.
And it also implies that they were shaped by some kind of design or intelligence.
And then benevolence is the last value she brings up within Confucianism. Benevolence is central to Ren. and therefore central to Confucian morality. And benevolence is further fostered by this vision of interconnections. I like this one line she brings up in a quote from one of their writings. And then my clear character will be completely manifested. Getting back to, if I could just get back to who I really, really am through benevolence and compassion. And the last line of benevolence is, understanding great unity, Neo-Confucian Cheng Yi asks, where is the limit to our expression of benevolence? I love that question. The obvious answer that he's going for and really lines up with our Christian vegan theology is there should not be any limit to our expression of benevolence.
Right.
It should cover all. And then she ends the Confucian morality and philosophy section with a little statement about their diet. Of course, this all affects the values around what they eat. Confucian religious traditions teach of a moral universe and view the nature of humanity as benevolent, compassionate, humane, and sensitive to the needs and wants of animals. Confucian religious traditions teach of a great ultimate that lies behind all, providing mind to all beings, and of a great unity that underlines all that exists. Confucian religious traditions teach that the suffering of animals and their lives are morally important, and that the innate goodness of humanity recoils at the thought of harming fellow creatures who are equal, sharing the great unity. So consequently, the Confucian tradition teaches against consuming animal products, which cause pain and suffering to other creatures.
You know, it's interesting. Twice now we've read this idea of the great ultimate provides mind to all beings. And I just wonder if that's some sense of sentience.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what we read in the Buddhist chapter, that we're all the same. We all come, like I talked about the soul, we all have this same soul. And because of reincarnation, that soul's the same, but it inhabits different vehicles. And I just wonder if this concept of the mind is similar.
Yeah. Consciousness or sentience. Yeah. She finishes this section on diet with quotes from Mencius, a Confucian teacher. The superior man is affected towards animals, so that having seen them alive, he cannot bear to see them die. Having heard their dying cries, he cannot bear to eat their flesh. He goes on to note that those who eat flesh will need to remain ignorant, both of the individuals who are slain and the process that is inherent in turning individuals into consumable body parts. That phrase, he will need to remain ignorant of those who are slain and those who have been turned into consumable body parts, is interesting to me. I've always been interested by how someone's, I'm going to use the word sins, can make it necessary for them to remain ignorant. To face the gravity of what they've done would be too great. And so their only option is to remain ignorant.
When we're busy consuming entertainment and animals, the moment a vegan shows up and puts a little reality into the picture, nobody wants to hear that in the middle of their good time.
Yeah.
For us to enjoy our entertainment and our food, our animal food, we have to remain ignorant. We have to choose to not want to know.
Yeah. And now we will look at Taoist philosophy and morality.
Okay, so what exactly is this concept of Tao? In this chapter, one author says Tao is ultimate reality. Tao is also critical to the formation of every individual. And there's a longer quote here. It says, the Tao or way is that reality or that level of reality that exists prior to and gave rise to all other things, the physical universe, heaven and earth, and all things in it. The way, in a sense, is like a great womb. It is empty and devoid in itself of differentiation, one in essence, yet somehow it contains all things in seed-like or embryo form, and all things emerge from the Tao as babies emerge from their mothers. And then continuing, Taoism postulates no definitive personal creator, no teleological goal, no intelligent design, and no judge to plan, punish, or even favor one activity over another. Instead, Taoists write of a natural force that is not only utterly benign, but continuously at work in the world. This natural force. Tao simply abides in all things. So that's very interesting.
I also liked what she says here. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Similarly, Zhuangzi, a great sage, found only the beginning of the realm of Tao and did not know where it might end. Humans are limited, and our grasp of the eternal is limited. The Tao represents that which we cannot know, that which lies outside of and beyond our understanding, that which maintains the order of the universe and permeates all that exists. This recognition that there is something that we cannot understand, we cannot know. What that reminded me of is we were listening to Peter Rollins. He was saying the same idea that as soon as we start talking about God, we're messing up. We cannot know or understand completely, and we never will in this state that we're in.
Yeah.
So this acknowledgement of that resonates with me on some level. Kemmerer writes, Taoist philosophy is built around 3 central moral treasures. Qi, which is compassion or deep love. Jian, which is restraint or frugality. And Bugan Wei Tianxia Qian. And of course, I apologize to any Chinese speakers for my mispronunciation. So that last one, though, is not daring to be at the forefront of the world.
Yeah.
All right, so there's 3 moral treasures that Taoist is built around is compassion or deep love, restraint or frugality, and not daring to be at the forefront of the world.
Yeah. Very interesting, right?
I mean,
Very different than our Western mindset.
I would say if someone were to describe Christianity, they would say a moral treasure is compassion or deep love. Restraint and frugality, maybe, depending on your Christian tradition. But the third one, not daring to be at the forefront of the world, that would sound foreign to the average Christian person's ears. We are taught that we are the center of the world.
The text does speak of humbleness.
Yes.
But
humility,
but you're referring to, we're the pinnacle of creation, and we're meant to have dominion.
Yes. All 3 of these concepts are deeply interconnected, and together they provide powerful protection for both nature generally and for animals specifically. So let's talk a little bit more about Qi.
And this is different, I think, than the Qi QI. This is CI. There's also a concept of a different kind of Qi.
Yeah.
That permeates all beings.
Like a life force.
Like a life force.
I think. Yeah. This Qi requires fostering life, which requires human beings to avoid harming any living being, even the wriggling worm. Taoism teaches respect for nature, requiring human beings to maintain habitat. The way of heaven is to benefit others and not to injure. Taoist literature abounds in stories of exemplary men and women who earned recognition, even transcendence, by secretly performing compassionate acts, particularly for creatures disdained by others. And then Jian, which is restraint or frugality, holds out the ideal of simplicity, of living lightly on the earth, causing little disturbance. While humans tend to squander their short lives grasping after businesses and books, nature shows the folly of such wild bursts of mindless energy. For those who are paying attention, nature, including animals, teaches Jian, restraint, frugality.
The author of the Zhuangzi encourages the simple life. When combined with Qi, Jian encourages human beings to live simply for the sake of compassion, so that other creatures might also live without being harmed or crowded from the planet. Human beings who practice Jian will engage in only that which is necessary to existence, and will leave by the wayside those many unnecessary activities that use resources and destroy habitats. Yeah, that's interesting. It's a good mindset to have today as we push the limits of our world.
Yeah. And then the third one, do you want to try to say it, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. Bu Genwei Jianzi Jian.
Yes.
Is that, yeah.
Qi and Jian stem from this. In other words, compassion for other creatures and a life of restraint and frugality both stem from not daring to be at the forefront of the world. When we place ourselves in the forefront, we push other creatures to the back. If we imagine that our needs are more important than the needs of any other species or any other individual, then our lives become cruel and exploitative. If we imagine ourselves to be superior to other creatures, we are likely to consider other creatures expendable and to exploit them for our purposes. This value reminds humanity that we are not the center of the universe.
Cryptic stories in the Zhuangzi emphasize maintaining humility in our interactions with other individuals, particularly individuals of other species. Zhuangzi reminds humanity that to insist that one's view of things is universally valid and true for all others and all species is simply wrong-headed. Zhuangzi mocks our tendency to view reality as if it were constructed especially for human beings, reminding that there is more to the world than can be imagined. One should not try to conform the world to one's limited perspective. For Taoists, Bugan Wei Tianzi Xian helps work against the human tendency to be arrogant and encourages us to take our humble place in the universe, allowing other creatures to do the same. There's so many times where, and maybe you feel this way, where humans come up with some solution for something and not everyone agrees, but they have some political power and will and money, and they just go make it happen, and it ends up being kind of counterproductive and maybe destructive. And you're racking your brain like, why? Why did somebody do that? Why did we do this? Why did people allow other people to do that? And I think it's just this part of this, maybe it's an American thing, or this Western thing where people are looking for solutions. And if you're not doing anything, then you're not doing anything, and the world's going to turn into chaos. So we need to do something. But sometimes it seems to me, based on this concept, it just makes me think that sometimes our solution, quote unquote solution, is actually counterproductive and destructive and not a solution. Maybe we should let nature take over. It just reminds me too, when I was a kid, there was this pond where I lived that was polluted, and all human wisdom said, oh, it's going to take 100 years for this thing to come back to health. And people just left it alone. And it didn't take 100 years. I mean, it took like 5 to 10 years. So it's just interesting how nature can, in some ways, take care of itself if left alone. At the same time, obviously, we need to be wise about how we interact with nature and with other beings, animals, each other.
She has a section here in this Taoism part of the chapter called transformation. Taoism holds that individuals are neither isolated nor enduring. Everything that exists is part of a great and ongoing transformation. No one stands outside of the great process of transformation. All of us are bits and pieces of everything else. Now a dragon, now a snake. You transform together with the times and never consent to be one thing alone. Our bodies are recycled after death back into the world of matter and life. The chain is never broken. We may prefer to envision ourselves as civilized, educated, mature, or highly intelligent, but at the end of the day, we are animals. As creatures of the earth, we decompose to become yet other elements of this ever-transforming cosmos. I am this particular individual only for a handful of decades, and like all other beings who exist at this point in time, or who have existed before, my current existence as this particular being is only a momentary happenstance in an ever-transforming universe. It's not quite the same as what we've read with Hinduism and Buddhism and karma and reincarnation, but very similar. We're all the same stuff, and when we die, we will be recycled into someone else.
Well, I think it's the first time I've ever thought of it like we all make up the whole of the universe, and we're just a part of it. but maybe an essential part of it. It's just fascinating to think of it that way, that we're just recycled back to, we're kind of created into something, some design, some intelligence, and then we're cycled back down into the building blocks.
Transformation carries flesh and fluids back into the great unity, back to become parts for other individuals living as the myriad species, and back to the earth itself. She tells one story that really brings this to life. I wanted to share. It's about when Master Lai was on his deathbed and he's speaking with a visitor, Master Li. Master Lai comments, "I received life because the time had come. I will lose it because the order of things passes on." Suddenly, Master Lai grew ill, gasping and wheezing. He lay at the point of death. His wife and children gathered round in a circle and began to cry. Master Li, who had come to ask how he was, said, "Shoo, get back. Don't disturb the process of change." Then he leaned against the doorway and talked to Master Lai. "How marvelous the Creator is. What is he going to make of you next? Where is he going to send you? Will he make you into a rat's liver? Will he make you into a bug's arm?" Master Lai said, "A child obeying his father and mother goes wherever he is told, east or west, south or north. And the yin and yang, how much more are they to a man than a father or mother? Now that they have brought me to the verge of death, if I should refuse to obey them, how perverse I would be. What fault is it of theirs? The great clod burdens me with form, labors me with life, eases me in old age, and rests me in death. So if I think well of my life, for the same reason, I must think well of my death. When a skilled smith is casting metal, if the metal should leap up and say, 'I insist upon being made into a moye,' he would surely regard it as very inauspicious metal indeed. Now, having had the audacity to take on human form once, if I should say, 'I don't want to be anything but a man,' nothing but a man, the Creator would surely regard me as a most inauspicious sort of person. So now I think of heaven and earth as a great furnace, and the Creator as a skilled smith. Where could he send me that would not be all right? I will go off to sleep peacefully, and then with a start, I will wake up." So the onlookers came to see that there is no cause for solemn rites or mourning. The dead had merely been scattered back into the universe.
Wow. It's interesting in this narration, there is speak of how marvelous the Creator is.
I know.
What is he going to make you next? But
I know.
it's really a force. So that's probably just a metaphor right there. But they put it in, they personified it.
Yes. Either the translator or the original.
Yeah,
writing.
I think because of the way we were grown up, right, religiously, culturally, we do think of a personal being out there orchestrating everything. And it's not the laws of the universe or evolution. When it becomes non-personal, we're less comfortable with that, or at least I am.
Yeah, I think I am too. I mean, one argument could be, how could a non-personal force end up creating person?
Yeah.
And there is something about love without an object to love. To me, the idea of God being person resonates more than God not being person. In talking about harmony and ultimate integrity and peace values in Taoism, she mentions that in Taoist writing, like most sacred writings, there is envisioned a time of harmony, often considered a time of great peace in other traditions. In this ideal time of harmony, which exists somewhere in the future, communities of varied species will live together in peace. The Zhuangzi explains that left to their own devices, human beings and animals would form harmonious natural communities. When people stop exploiting and terrorizing animals, we will live in a golden age of ultimate integrity, side by side together. In this world, animals will not fear humans, but they will not be domesticated. This flourishing land of harmony, untrammeled by humanity, a world that can only be realized when we live into our true nature. I think that's an important piece of Taoism, that they foresee a coming age in which there will be harmony and kinship.
Right. A peaceable kingdom.
Yeah.
It's like our eternal state.
She also talks a lot about a concept called Wu Wei, which is very similar to Jian in my mind, which is the idea of walking lightly on the earth and not imposing our will on the world.
Right.
Wu Wei requires the practitioners abandon human intrigue and live in accordance with nature without attempting to control or change our surroundings or other creatures.
Yeah, this concept's interesting, and it came up earlier in the chapter, but it's kind of a balance, right, in our lives of allowing people to be people, and especially in light of animals, allowing a pig to be a pig, allowing a cow to be a cow, or a bird to be a bird. We're not going to impose our human will on them. At the same time, with our mandate, we talk about organizing and creating some level of stewardship, but I think that stewardship doesn't mean dominating another animal. I like this idea of respect. I feel like that's what this is saying, that you don't have to impose your will on everything. You can allow things to be things, but you can also maintain some kind of order.
Yeah.
Interesting concept.
There's a really good example of this here. She writes, controlling horses or cows is a form of interference. Horses and cattle are not here to satisfy our whims. Horses and cattle should be allowed to go about their own lives, consistent with their own natures. Controlling actions, Wei, are likely to turn happy equines into brigands and ultimately destroy their lives. There's a quote here about this. Horses' hooves are made for treading frost and snow, their coats for keeping out wind and cold. To munch grass, drink from the stream, lift up their feet and gallop. This is the true nature of horses. Though they might possess great terraces and fine halls, they would have no use for them. Then along comes Po Lo. Quote, I'm good at handling horses, he announces, and proceeds to singe them, shave them, pare them, brand them, bind them with martingale and crupper, tie them up in stable and stall. By this time, 2 or 3 out of 10 horses have died. He goes on to starve them, make them go thirsty, race them, prance them, pull them into line, force them to run side by side. In front of them, the worry of bit and rein. Behind them, the terror of whip and crop. By this time, over half the horses have died.
Wow. That really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
Yes. She lists several Taoist precepts, which all boil down to do not kill or harm, which lines up very nicely with the Buddhist 5 precepts. It seems like there may be more precepts in Taoism. She quotes from the 180 precepts of Lord Lao, who was from the 5th century.
Do not keep many animals. Do not kill or harm any being. Do not raise pigs or sheep. Do not eat meat. Do not engage in killing. Do not encourage others to kill. Do not step on or kick domestic animals. Do not fish or hunt or thereby harm and kill the host of living beings. Do not, in winter, dig up insects hibernating in the earth. Do not wantonly climb trees or plunder nests and destroy birds' eggs. Do not catch birds or beasts in cages or nets. Do not wantonly whip the 6 domestic animals. Do not ride a horse or drive a carriage without good reason. Do not startle birds or beasts. Always be mindful of purity and remember the divine law. Honor the pure and wise, and sparingly eat like a deer and drink like cattle. Always diligently avoid being cruel. If someone kills birds and beasts, fish, or other living beings for you, do not eat them. If something has been killed for food, do not eat it. To be able to cut out all meat of living beings and the 6 domestic animals is best. Without doing this, you will violate the precepts. Practice these precepts without violation, and if you violate one, make sure you repent properly. Then change your behavior. Widely pursue the salvation of all beings. Wow.
Very specific.
Yeah.
And detailed. Another one of their texts comes from the 5th century and is referred to as the highest precepts of wisdom for the salvation of all living beings. There are 6 of these, and 3 out of the 6 focus on munificence in our interactions with animals. I'll read those. Give wisely to the birds and beasts, to all species of living creatures. Take from your own mouth to feed them. Let there be none left unloved or not cherished. May they be full and satisfied generation after generation. May they always be born in the realm of blessedness. Save all that wriggles and runs, all the multitude of living beings. Allow them all to reach fulfillment and prevent them from suffering an early death. May they all have lives in prosperity and plenty. May they never step into the multiple adversities. Always practice compassion in your heart, commiserating with all. Liberate living beings from captivity and rescue them from danger. It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
And of course, she ends this little section on Taoist philosophy and morality with a section on diet, which follows very easily from that. And it's not surprising that Taoist monks continue to this day to enjoy a peaceful life fueled by a fleshless diet. What one ingests is what one is. To consume the meat of slaughtered animals is to make suffering, injury, and violent death part of oneself. Meat eating is not the practice of priests or immortal. Such is not the practice of adepts of the Tao or realized beings. Taoist purity requires a plant-based diet, not just a vegetarian diet, because dairy and eggs are created in industries that slaughter cattle and hens when they no longer produce milk or eggs. Furthermore, both male calves and chicks are destroyed at birth or shortly thereafter for the sake of milk and egg production. Animal products, including dairy and eggs, are inevitably linked with slaughter in contemporary markets. Because bloodshed is spiritually impure, and because both the internal physical body and the physical universe are sacred, Taoist practice requires a vegan diet.
That's very specific.
Yeah.
Right?
That line, because bloodshed is spiritually impure. And this reminds me of Will Tuttle and how he describes eating animals as it's spiritually impure. I mean, I think he goes so far to call it demonic.
Yeah,
and
I was going to say evil.
And I think at first that might feel a little incongruent with Judeo-Christian beliefs.
Right.
But I want to say that it is consistent with a fuller understanding of Judeo-Christianity that bloodshed is considered by God to be spiritually impure.
Yeah.
I always feel like there's so much more in these chapters that we skip over, but
Right.
I'm looking at the time and and I feel like maybe it's time to move on to how she always finishes these chapters with this wonderful section on animal liberationists within these traditions.
Yeah.
And she brings up several different people, but I think we will focus just on one of them today, who is named Louis Comjathy.
Louis Comjathy. Louis Comjathy, a contemporary Taoist scholar and practitioner of 15 years, is also an ordained complete perfection priest. He notes that for anyone who claims to have ecological commitments or environmental concerns, vegetarianism is a minimal requirement, and that animal industries ought to be systematically undermined and eventually extinguished through a shift in consumption.
This is some of Comjathy's writings. Anyone who understands the realities of modern slaughterhouses or meat-packing plants and still has access to the core goodness of innate nature, the Tao made manifest in, as, through us, will accept the responsibility of vegetarianism. The consumption of meat enmeshes an individual in an interconnected system of suffering, exploitation, and murder. Such are the perils of domination and domestication. A lack of direct killing does not lessen one's karmic involvement for one who eats animal products. The personal consequences of that involvement may differ with each person, but the consequences for the animals, human and non-human, for society and for the world are quite clear. One important consequence is suffering. This suffering is clearly audible, as is the inner call to relieve suffering.
Comjathy views all of life as a ritual process, as a form of communitas, and as an expression of reverence for the sacred. By choosing vegan foods, One frees not only animals who are confined and prematurely killed, but also those people who confine and kill other creatures. Kamjati notes that dietary change is a spiritual process. Liberating oneself from a context of violence liberates those who inflict violence and those upon whom the violence is inflicted. Through a dietary shift away from animal products, one becomes less material and more rarefied. Through a process of cosmicization, a state of transpersonal interconnection develops. One abides in the premortal undifferentiation of the Tao, in which personal selfhood and selfish desires disappear, and beings are able to abide in their own natural places.
I really like that he's bringing in the humans that are trapped in this industry as well.
Yeah.
He goes on, as a Taoist, I am responsible to relieve suffering among sentient beings, especially those suffering and helpless under human hands, those in distant forests, rivers, and mountains, those experimented on for human benefit, those abused and neglected domesticated animals, and those raised for consumption. I endeavor to follow a Taoist way of life, a life based in attentiveness, reverence, connection, energetic sensitivity, observation, and deep listening reveal vast suffering. And yet beneath this, there is the numinous presence of the Tao. We must cultivate the ability to recognize both suffering and the Tao in all beings. We may begin with a commitment to inquiry. What are we cultivating? What are we listening to? From a Taoist perspective, we may ask a perennial question. What does it mean to be fully human?
There's a lot of good stuff in this Taoist philosophy. Let's just Lisa Kemmer's summary of this chapter. Confucian traditions teach that all beings stem from one source, the great ultimate, and participate in the great unity. Ren, love or benevolence, is the essence of all that is good in humanity and extends across species, as exemplified in the noble person Junzi. Taoism also encourages people to love deeply and live compassionately, Qi, to exercise restraint and frugality, Jian, to seek harmony and to practice Wu Wei, action as non-action. Taoist precepts speak often and strongly against harming any creature, whether by disturbing their homes or eating their bodies. The Zhuangzi highlights basic similarities between humans and animals and encourages people to treat all beings with care and respect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good in here. I know, like we mentioned, the Western tradition, we are always thinking about exerting our will and exerting our power, and I really love this idea. We could unpack it more, but the woo-wee, the action is non-action. And I remember one time a friend of mine a mentor was talking about how powerful it is to restrain your power, to hold your power. And I don't know, there's a lot of good things in this chapter, a lot of good ideas and values that we could benefit from, that we could incorporate into our stewardship model.
Yeah, I felt like reading this was very impactful, and a lot of it does resonate with our vegan theology as Christians.
Absolutely.
And next episode will be on Judaism. We'll head into the monotheistic traditions.
Yeah, the ancient or Eastern origin traditions. Anyway, all right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Later.